I'd like to give an introduction to Infants on Thrones.
I'd like to give an introduction to Infants on Thrones.
I know this podcast is true.
I know this podcast is true.
I'm thankful for the infants.
I'm thankful for the infants.
I don't know. Okay,
That's funny.
Yeah, okay.
If you could have actually gotten to this episode.
Yeah. All right. Today's episode is all about our favorite new president.
Our favorite new president.
And his executive orders.
And the executive orders about immigration.
Right. Yeah, there's. Right. Yeah, that's okay.
This is Infants on Thrones, the philosophies of men mingled with humor. We are the Quorum.
The immigration scene, shining and feeling clean. Could it be a sin? I got stopped by the immigration man. He said he doesn't know if he can.
3 immigration executive orders, 2 that have to do with Mexico, and the one particular controversial one that has to do with the Muslim and refugee ban. And so we brought on an expert on immigration law, a lawyer, and current Mormon, because we're a Mormon-themed podcast.
Sure.
To talk about what these EOs are, these executives order are, some of the implications. Captain EO.
Does
that should be ours.
Captain EO? Captain EO.
That should be our
Captain EO.
So that's not a thing anymore. They do Star Wars now.
I know.
They brought it back.
Captain EO. They had a throwback.
It's back.
I saw it a couple of years ago.
Because they got rid of it.
That's great.
Yeah, it was
Captain
good.
EO's good, but they got rid of it. That's the only thing I remember.
Oh, yeah.
But they got rid of it.
It was an interactive movie theater and everything. It was really.
I know what it is. But they got rid of it when he, became a child molester and everything. So you didn't really want him.
No, then they got rid of it when people found out that he was a child. Not when he became.
He had been one the whole time.
Yeah,
is what you're saying.
Probably. I mean, who knows? So, but just for the intro to this, I think it's important to say why you're interested in this. Like, what is it that you're doing?
Well, I don't know what I'm doing.
I know you don't know what you're doing.
I really don't know what I'm doing.
But you were really motivated to read each one of these executive orders, provide a summary, and kind of cut through the sensational
stop listening to the headlines and listen to the news and what people's summaries of them and try to understand what it actually is, because, man, these things matter.
Right, and quit being partisan. Right?
Yeah.
Like, not Democrat, liberal, Republican, conservative, whatever. Let's just look at these things for what they are.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll see if we accomplish that in our conversation today.
All right.
I don't know if we did this, Glenn.
I don't know.
Let me try this. Hey, this is Matt with Infants on Thrones, and on this episode, we're going to talk to an immigration attorney about the executive orders that Trump has put in effect.
President Trump.
So-called President Trump.
Capital P, capital T.
Has put in effect regarding immigration. There's 3. There's 3 total.
There's 3 total. Okay, so now we'll go back to the testimony thing where you say it and I kind of repeat it. No, go ahead.
We'll be talking about 3 of the executive orders. 2 that have to do with Mexico, and then the one that has to do with a refugee and Muslim ban from certain countries. Hope it's not too boring, and we hope we're not too partisan.
We don't really care one way or the other. I mean, if it's bored, if they're bored, who cares?
Yeah,
we don't really care.
Hey, look, we've done good up to this point. So if we have
pretty good.
If we have a swing and a miss on this one,
we've got a couple of misses.
All right, let's jump in, because I know you're not going to want to be in here too long, Mindy.
No, all night. It's cool.
Yeah.
Hang with you guys.
Yeah, no, this will be cool. And I'm really glad to have you as a resource. That way I don't have to pretend like I know what I'm talking about. Although some of the stuff, like you said, so I do have a little background in some of the criminal stuff. I was the 287G attorney, the prosecutor, who was kind of over that when they were doing that back in the day, when
Is that right?
Yeah, although our strategy...
I have no idea what you're talking about right now. 287.
It's when back when local law enforcement was enforcing immigration law, and so they had certain cops that were able to enforce immigration law, essentially. So that's what they would do. They had to go through this program. They were trained, and then it was determined that they can't do that. We did it a little differently, though. My goal was, how I directed it was to use the people that they ended up stopping as either victims or witnesses to try to go and get the cartels and the people who were taking advantage of people and everything. So I think we were at least doing it the right way, but yeah, that's what happens when, with prosecutorial discretion, certain people can do what they want to do and other people can be shitbags. So, but by and large, even my friends that were kind of doing that, the people that I know all have the same philosophy. So I have enough knowledge about it to be dangerous. So that's why I'm glad you're on, basically.
Yeah.
I have zero knowledge.
Yeah, Glenn can just ask questions when we so that we know that.
So when we start to nerd out, you can ease back down.
I can go, what's 287?
Yeah, we won't get too technical anyway.
And this is about the executive order on banning the refugees from the 7 countries. Is that what this is about?
Well, it's about the executive orders related to, I think, immigration generally.
Okay.
And Mindy, can you tell I guess Glenn and everyone kind of what you do for work and what your background is.
Yeah. So I'm an immigration attorney with a nonprofit, and it's called the Florence Project. And it's been around in Arizona for, about 26 years now. And so our mission is sort of unique because we principally serve detained immigrants. And most private immigration attorneys don't actually go in, well, a lot of them do not go into facilities that are detaining immigrants, but we do, and that's where a lot of our clients come from. We'll also help folks who have been released from detention. And my job actually is I dedicate all of my time to juveniles who crossed the border and were apprehended, and they don't have parents here, or at least they crossed without parents. Unaccompanied minors, and they're sort of like the most vulnerable of all of the different immigrants that you see. And it's interesting because they, when juveniles without parents get detained, they get put in these shelters all across Phoenix. There's maybe about 8 shelters, and there's hundreds and hundreds of children being detained at any one time. But they're like supposedly child-friendly detention centers, so they're not quite as scary as adult detention centers, but the children are certainly being detained. There's no question that they don't have freedom. They're being watched. They can't touch doors. They can't touch windows.
There's always money in the banana stand! No touching! No touching! No touching! No touching!
There's lots of rules restricting them. And while they're there, our office goes in and gives them presentations describing their rights. And we do legal screenings. We try to figure out who might have relief through immigration court. And then we will take on a lot of their cases.
And you're looking for, you're also looking for, I guess, refugee status, or if there's some reason that they can stay. I know I was involved with a handful of cases. If there was, and we'd get the, I'm not going to get the number right, but it was the victim visas. So if they were victims of crimes, we help out with that piece. And so I recall we probably interface with some of your people you work with.
Right. If you've been a victim of a certain type of crime while you're in the United States, you can pursue what's called a U visa. But yeah, we screen to see if they qualify for asylum, to see if they qualify for a special immigrant juvenile visa. or these U visas, like you mentioned, or trafficking visas usually are the ones that we're looking for.
Right.
So we do a quick screening, and then we accept a lot of cases and just represent a lot of children. We have an adult office, and I think that you probably interacted with some of the other attorneys that serve the adults in Florence and Eloy. That's where most of the adults are detained.
Right. And I forgot about this. I was offered a job to do for not the U.S. Attorney's Office, but for the Office of Homeland Security, for the attorneys that would do the hearings to get people kicked out.
You're fired. You're fired. You're fired. You're fired.
And you declined?
I declined.
That would have been fun.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm really glad, because you probably wouldn't be having this conversation tonight.
Yeah, no, I imagine they wouldn't let me. But that was a good thing to turn down.
How long ago was that?
Yeah.
Geez, it would have been like probably 10 years ago, and I went through the interview process. Did everything, and then just didn't hear anything for about 11 months. I was like, whatever. I moved on, got another job, and they called me up. They're like, all right, hey, we're ready to hire you.
Beautiful.
Yeah, hey, you want to start? Like, I'm like, it was like 11 months ago. Oh, yeah, we went on a hiring freeze. We didn't tell you about that.
Yeah, right. But now we're ready.
Yeah, no, this is who I want to work for.
Yeah.
But turned out I did not understand what that job was when I applied for it at the time. I was kind of looking to something. But yeah, so I went to that Eloy facility and actually shadowed somebody for like 4 hours, 5 hours, whatever. And yeah, that would have been a rough existence. But
Yeah.
a lot of people do. I mean, people got to do it. But yeah, so nothing's really happened in immigration over the last.
Yeah, I've been so bored.
Yeah, I bet.
Sleeping in every day.
Jeez. So what has been, I guess, the reaction? What are the things that is on your radar primarily over the last week as some of these executive orders come out? And that was a broad question intentionally.
Okay. Well, as far as what impacts me in my work personally, it's not so much these immigrants that we're hearing about from the Middle East.
Uh-huh.
Because those are all refugees, and the ones that he targeted, they're all coming from these 7 different Middle Eastern countries, and we don't have that many of those kinds of refugees here in Arizona. We do have some. But the refugees or the immigrants that I deal with principally are coming from south of the border. And President Trump actually executed 3 orders relating to immigration in the last several days. And only one of them had to do with those Middle Eastern countries. The other 2 have to do with people that are either already in the interior of the United States, are already here, or they're being apprehended at the border. And those kinds of immigrants and refugees I do deal with all the time.
And I assume you and your office kind of poured through the executive orders, kind of understanding what the implications and are going to be on the immigrants here as well as on your job. Right. So what's the consensus in your office? What's, as it relates to, I guess, the interior?
I need to back up and just ask like some really stupid questions.
Please, that's why you're here.
Yeah, to be the dumb person. Like when an executive order is signed, does that make it a lot? Like, I don't remember that Schoolhouse Rock video. Like, I'm just an executive order.
We should do that.
Yeah.
You sure got to lift a heavy pen, Mr. Trump, to sign all those executive orders in your first week in office, especially with such tiny hands. And now look at all those sad little scraps of paper and all the refugee children getting paper cuts on their cheeks trying to wipe away their tears with them. Well, now I'm just an executive order. I'm only an executive order, and I'm hoping for an impenetrable border. Well, it's a long, long journey to escape a bad scene. And true, this here's the country of American dreams. But if the color of your skin's too brown, better best believe you must leave. There's a new orange sheriff in town.
Yeah, right. but so is it? Are they kind of guidelines, or is it law? What does it mean when he signs this executive order?
It is law, and it's binding on agencies. It's different from a law that's passed through Congress because it didn't come through Congress. It came from the president. But it is binding. And these executive orders are, as soon as they're executed, they're put into place as long as it's not dependent on, say, funding or something. And, sometimes you will get an executive order that, is marshaling all sorts of resources, but there's really no money allocated for it. So it's not really effective yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but
it's like a wish, right? A dream is a wish the heart makes.
This is.
Yeah.
Yeah. But as long as Congress hasn't passed a law against this executive order, then it becomes law. And there's a lot of wiggle room in these executive orders. There's a lot of phrases that just say, as far as it is legal or as long as X, Y, and Z happen, then we're putting this into place. But yeah, they're binding. And they of course, can be challenged through the court system. And they are already being challenged and will continue to be challenged via the courts. But, that process sometimes is very slow. And so, to get these executive orders either crushed or to walk them back sometimes is a really long process.
And in many, as I understand some of these executive orders, and in many executive orders, it's the application of law. So it's not changing law. It's
how to interpret it,
interpreting and applying it. Mm-hmm. So they're saying, okay, pursuant to this is how I'm directing these agencies as the executive to essentially enforce the law. And so many of the laws are very broadly worded, and so it gives that that ability, I guess, to do that. So sometimes I think there's a misperception that this is some sort of fiat, and it is, but it's not changing anything. It's not
fiat.
Yeah, it's by just from on high saying I am going to alter the law, and it used to be this, and now I'm declaring law. It's not. It's using existing law and it's applying that. And I think that's an important thing to highlight because this isn't. Nothing really changed at the election by way of laws. What changed is an approach and a philosophy.
That's why it's called the executive branch of government, and he's saying this is how they should be executed, right?
That's my understanding. Mindy, do you disagree with that?
Yeah, I do sort of disagree with that. I look back on some of the executive orders that Obama came up with.
I don't like the way you said Obama.
I heart Obama.
Okay. Obama.
No, I heart Obama. We're best buds, BFF. But no, like, for example, I don't know if you've heard of the Dreamers Act, but DACA, that's a special immigration law that is being offered to young immigrants who basically have committed no crimes. Parents brought them here when they were very small, have just been playing by all the rules. And so Obama created, out of whole cloth, this program called the Dreamers Act. And I don't believe that was an interpretation of an old law. That was a brand new program. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, no, I was going to say, and that's where he got a lot of criticism, saying that's not what the executive orders are supposed to do, and that's what he was doing.
Right.
Because then it gets into like legislation, right? You're creating laws from nothing.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's why. So I guess my question is with these executive orders, do you see anything like that whereas it didn't exist before, and it doesn't exist by way of law, is there something new by these executive orders, or is he relying on existing statutes?
Yeah, that's a good question, because a lot of the details in these orders, they have some kind of seed somewhere, right? Like they might have existed in like a smaller form years ago, or they've just been morphed, or they've been expanded, or like the 7 countries that were articulated, that, there's the so-called Muslim ban on these 7 countries. Well, Obama, there had been, I don't know if it was a statute or what, but it was some kind of visa-related regulation that had already articulated those 7 countries as sort of being problematic. And so Trump used
countries of concern,
so Trump used that list and, applied it to a new set of regulations or orders, right? And so, and even like in the example of, say, like the wall, we've always had a wall, but now he's directing, we are going to marshal all of these resources and build a bigger wall. And we've always had detention at the border, but now we want to expand it. And
I've been watching Arrested Development, like the season 4. That came out 3 years ago? Yeah. I don't know, something. It's all about the wall. Did you know? Like the wall between Mexico and America is like a big part of the storyline for Arrested Development. It's crazy to me looking at that because it's so relevant to discussions that are happening right now. Yeah. So, but I guess it's been discussed, before. To your point, Melinda, that this isn't new. The wall's been there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, one issue that is of great concern is what Matt was bringing up, where there was this project or this experiment that Arizona took on a couple of years ago, where we did ask our local police and sheriff's offices to sort of start acting like immigration officers. And that is definitely part of this new executive order. And we experimented with it in Arizona. It went down very poorly, and it sort of the specter of racial profiling sort of popped up, and we started having lots of problems with that. And so, basically, in one of these orders relating to the interior, President Trump is directing our municipalities to start asking their law enforcement agents to identify undocumented immigrants. And
now I was looking for that, and I read it today, in preparation to talk to you. And where is it that I was trying to see if that was in there because and I saw a reference to the 287. Was it the 287G was referenced, which I don't understand what that means other than we used it when it related to local law enforcement being 287G qualified, and all I knew that meant is they had some authority over immigration enforcement.
That's exactly what it is. They're called 287G agreements, and when a municipality agrees or enters into one of those agreements, they are agreeing to take on this additional responsibility of reporting suspected undocumented people to ICE.
So when they say when 287G is invoked in that executive order, that is what they're talking about. That does refer to municipalities. There's no just federal immigration officer that is 287G. Did I articulate that right?
Yeah, it's 287G is like a part of the immigration statutes, and that just provides that cities and municipalities can enter into these agreements with the federal government, and then they can pretty much authorize their officers to begin acting like ICE agents.
Okay, so I do see it here. So this Section 8 of that, it says the federal state agreements, and in furtherance, the Secretary shall immediately take appropriate action to engage governors of states as well as local officials for the purpose of preparing to enter in agreements under Section 287G. Okay, so he's specifically applying that to all state or reinstituting this 287G program. My memory was that had been the courts have already resolved that and said no, local law enforcement cannot enforce immigration law. And I may be conflating something because there used to be in Arizona we used to have we had a state statute that related to criminalizing being here illegal essentially, and so the states and the counties were able to enforce some of that. Smuggling, for example. So we had for a while county attorneys were prosecuting human smuggling cases for a number of years, and then that was struck down and said no, states don't have the authority to do that. That's just done, and so that really made all those types of things defunct, and nobody was able to do that after that. And in addition, there were just other problems related to how do you enforce it, what papers do you ask for, what are the profiling that goes on.
Sure.
So are you going to get it? Glenn, are you going to be contacted by somebody and say, "Well, I want to see, some proof of that you're able to be in this country versus other people. And that's what we saw, especially in Maricopa County and here in Arizona, where we had Sheriff Joe, who was absolutely targeting and profiling and doing things illegal, and as a result has cost the county a lot of millions of dollars.
Right. That's exactly it. And I think the other concern is not just the racial profiling, but it's also really not the job of your local policemen. Their job is to just sort of keep the peace and build community relationships. And when suddenly, they will suspect any person who's brown of not being a citizen, and it makes it so that folks who are undocumented are afraid of ever reporting crime. So crime goes unpunished. Legitimate crime goes unpunished because people are afraid to report it. And that is the exact opposite of what a job of a policeman is, which is to just establish law and order and keep everybody safe.
And we did have, when I was handling sex crimes, we had a number of situations where victims of rape were very, very nervous coming forward, and even after they did come forward, their willingness to cooperate. It took a lot to convince them that we're not looking to take action on you. We want we're some of the good guys, and we're here to protect you. And it was really a battle to deal with that. And I didn't realize I had, and I think everybody had been so focused on the refugee ban and the Muslim, the so-called Muslim ban, that I wasn't aware of some of the stuff that did come up here related to, especially the people who are currently present here. So let's go through this a little bit. We hit some high points, but so that's one problem that I guess your office has and that you see as problematic is the local giving authority to local law enforcement without some of the same resources and oversight and training and all those things, and the risk of law enforcement roulette, which law enforcement officer are you going to get, which law enforcement agency are you going to get, and there's not really uniform, and asking the small town in Texas or Arizona or New Mexico somewhere else versus Phoenix or some of these other places, these larger, they're just going to be there are going to be different policies and different approaches. I think necessarily that's clearly, as I see, one problem. You've talked about some others, but specifically on that issue, are there any other concerns that you have, or some of the concerns that your office has with regards to federalizing local law enforcement agencies to enforce immigration law?
Well, I would just mention that there will be a punishment for cities that resist this. So when you look at the language, the executive order says that, it's really up to the city. You can consent or not consent to act like ICE agents. But if you decide not to, there is an explicit threat in this executive order that if you have federal grants, that we can withhold those from you. So cities, so-called sanctuary cities, or cities that are, and there's really no good definition for sanctuary city. It's just basically anybody who's resisting turning their police force into ICE, that they can be punished by the withdrawal of federal monies, which really puts a city in a tough place. You want to do right by your community members and make sure that their programs are still funded and functioning. But at the same time, there's a lot of cities that care very much about their undocumented population, and they don't want to erode the trust between their policemen and their community members. And so cities are having to make this really tough decision. Like, what do we do? Do we keep the funds and potentially terrorize our undocumented people, or do we just forego the funds and just remain a more safe community for our undocumented?
So I want to go back to what you guys were talking about before, because I think I'm catching up. That here in Arizona, local law enforcement used to act as if they were ICE agents for a period of time, and then that was reversed. What was the mechanism that reversed that? Was it just experience and people saying, this isn't the best use of the, or was it somebody that challenged it, took it to the courts, and it was unconstitutional? Why did that change?
Yeah, that law was called SB 1070, and
geez, I totally had put that out of my.
Yeah.
I'm like being triggered by now hearing it.
And it was several years ago, so it is sort of like out of our collective memory now, right? But it was definitely Arizona's experiment with this whole process, and it was challenged in the courts, and it actually was brought up to the Supreme Court. And I didn't live in Arizona at the time, so I wasn't totally on the cutting edge of this at the time. These are just things I remember. But I remember that actually the most devastating part of 1070 was upheld by the Supreme Court. And there were other parts of the SB 1070 that were struck down, but the part that was encouraging the racial profiling was actually upheld. So your question is a good one, like, what happened to that program? Yeah. It does seem like it just, and Matt, maybe you can remember, or maybe some of your, criminal law background, you can better identify what exactly fizzled out or what caused that to fizzle out.
Well, especially if the Supreme Court got involved and they said that there were parts of this that were unconstitutional, but here's the executive order saying do this.
But what I'm saying is the part that permitted the racial profiling was the part that was upheld by the Supreme Court.
Okay.
So it was found constitutional.
So what the executive order is requiring of local law enforcement now, there isn't anything in the past that overturned when Arizona was doing this before. There isn't anything there that would suggest that it couldn't happen again.
And I'm trying to, and now, Mindy, you're making me try to remember now what it was that caused that shift to just stop. And part of it was because I stopped being involved in that and started handling different types of cases. Thank goodness. I didn't love that assignment back then, but and I started handling sex crimes pretty soon after. And so when it left, or when they stopped using that program, I wasn't involved, so I don't recall specifically why that happened. But I know Pinal County, where I was working, and I mean that was that's a hotbed there. There's a couple thoroughfares coming through there on both sides, and so they were very much involved in it. So I don't recall. I'm here to provide information, but I just can't provide this information.
Well, good thing it's being recorded to go out at a later time, so we can look it up and
later.
And so then, Melinda, I think the point where I interrupted you, you were talking about the choice that local law enforcement now has to make. Would they go back to a program that they tried before and disregarded for whatever reason, or do they say this is worth it to get the funds or to keep our funds and keep our funding? And that's kind of the position that people are in at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I read an article that I think it's Travis County in Texas, where Austin is located. Their sheriff is being really outspoken. It's just saying there's absolutely no way. There's no way that we will institute this program. Mm-hmm. And, so they're going to have to look at their citizens and say, yeah, we are giving up these federal monies.
Yeah. And you mentioned grants earlier. My reading of it is he's saying federal funding, any federal funding that they can legally withhold. That's what's in the executive order.
Yeah, I don't think he can touch money that Congress has allocated for cities or states. Mm-hmm. But I think that it's grant money. That's my interpretation. Okay. It could, maybe there are other sources of funding. I'm not sure.
And I saw at one point they mentioned grants, and another point it was a little more broadly worded than that. And I think some of the problems, and Mindy experiences this. I know in dealing with these people directly, and I've gotten a chance to represent a number of people who have been caught these what we call backpacker cases, right? So you've got a group of 5 to 14 people who get into a van at some point in southern Arizona and are given a backpack about 40, 50 pounds worth of marijuana, carpet shoes, canvas bags so that they're leaving as little marks as possible, for trackers and Border Patrol. And they're coming into the country. What people don't understand, they think these are drug dealers. These are drug runners.
Mules, right?
But that's what they're mules. Even worse than that, these are people who show up at somewhere in Mexico and really have no intention of bringing this dope in. They're not there to be criminals. They didn't sign up for it. They signed up to come over to this country, but not to bring drugs. And then they're told by somebody, you're going to carry that backpack. And so there's a lot of duress that's going on. These are people who this is the only crime they will ever commit. They're not coming here to be criminals. They're not coming here to be part of the cartels. They're not part of the cartels. They're not. These are in many ways as much victims of the circumstances and of the cartels as anyone is. Yeah. And that's what's frustrating, to talk to these people and to hear what brought them to sitting in jail, facing a significant prison time. And that's what I find tragic, is that they are painted with this brush of criminal, illegal, all these pejoratives, and they aren't. And I can blatantly say that.
But they were still coming into the country illegally.
Oh, absolutely.
But often what motivated them to start that journey was some kind of fear or some kind of violence. So maybe they didn't come with the intention of, crossing drugs, but something was motivating them to come. And yes, some of them are what you would call economic migrants, just looking to better their standard of living. But there are many, many, what truly are, they are refugees, because they have been persecuted and they have been victims of violence, and they see no other way out other than to just abandon ship where they live and go north and seek asylum in the United States. And yes, some of them end up being sort of coerced into being drug mules, but the majority of them are not even committing that crime. They're simply just trying to find a safe haven. And that's a lot of what I see, especially with the children. They are bona fide asylum seekers, which is the same thing as a refugee. It's just a refugee is applying for status outside of the country, and an asylum seeker is either inside the country or at the border, but the same qualifications. Folks that have been persecuted, that have genuine fear of returning. And I see it all the time of these kids, especially coming from Central America. Not as much from Mexico, but Central America is an awful mess right now. It is like a war zone in El Salvador and Honduras specifically. There are drug lords that run the towns, or gang members that will threaten you. You either join us or you will die. And then before you know it, the next day the kid's dead, and it's terrifying.
So other than some of the requirements or the orders for the local law enforcement, what are some of the other parts of the executive order related to dealing with immigrants who are present in the country that stand out to you that I guess that maybe people aren't aware of that you think they ought to be aware of?
Okay, Matt, this is going to interest you.
We'll see if it does.
Oh, well, I promise. I will deliver. Okay, so one of the things that we really prize as being Americans and having a constitution that we embrace is this concept of due process, right? That we are guaranteed that you actually don't even have to be a citizen. You just have to be a person. And according to the Constitution, We will not deprive you of your life, liberty, or property without due process, right?
Yeah.
And so usually due process involves some kind of a hearing, see a judge, a jury, something. And but there are some changes that have been brought about by this executive order that really diminish due process for undocumented immigrants. And one of those has to do with the very folks that you applied for a job with, ICE, it sounds like, a couple of years ago. They have to have priorities. They have explicit priorities of the folks that they will bring into removal proceedings and folks that they just aren't going to bother with.
Okay.
They just low priorities, right? And so in the past, like under the Obama administration, the priorities really came down to one of two things. Either you are a convicted criminal of a serious crime, like a felony, or just barely got here.
And usually it has to be over a punishment that exceeds 1 year, if I'm remembering correct. So
yeah, that sounds familiar. I don't usually deal with clients like that, but it was that kind of a priority. They were looking for felony criminals or recent arrivals. Those were right?
Yeah.
With this executive order, Trump has decided, you know what? I'm going to mix up the priorities now, and you can find this worded in the executive order. The language is super vague. It just says anybody who is convicted of a crime, any crime, at any time, is now a priority.
And
Here.
Well, did you say convicted?
Yeah, convicted.
But it doesn't stop there.
What do you mean?
It's not just convicted, right? It's also if you were just charged with a criminal offense.
Okay, yes, Matt. Yeah, if you were just charged and it's unresolved.
Yeah, pre-adjudication.
Right.
But then it even goes further than that.
Yes, it does.
If you determine that you've committed an act and it's chargeable, even if you haven't been charged.
Right. Those are the new priorities. You want to talk about a lack of due process? Like you are guilty before you're in.
Like Minority Report. If you're going to conceive of doing this crime,
yeah. But that's really problematic when you say, okay, because if you haven't been charged, right? There's been. I'm trying to conceive of a situation where you can determine, okay, this person committed. We're determining that they committed a crime, although there's no charging document or conviction. I don't know what that looks like.
Right.
Practically.
It's suspicion, right?
Right, because especially when it doesn't apply, like you said, a standard or a fact finder or, I think we call that due process is what you were saying.
So I think we could all agree, too, that this particular part of the executive order is super sloppy. Like maybe not a single lawyer looked at it, or else they would have called attention to that. Like, how on earth are you going to enforce this?
Right.
There's no standard. This will be applied very inconsistently. It's vague. But so yeah, that's a serious concern, and pretty much almost anybody could become a priority, right? So the kid who is a dreamer, the kid who's been here since he was 2, graduated from high school, is in college, never committed a crime, he's a priority.
Right.
He was suspected of doing something 5 years ago. So that's another serious issue.
On the same priorities, one of the priorities, and this one also jumped out to me. It says, in the judgment of an immigration officer, otherwise poses a risk to public safety or national security. So you're now given discretion to an immigration officer to make that determination without terms and definitions and oversight and standards and anything else. And that's
right.
All those are. You're right. I'm interested in that. That does and I'll say as a prosecutor, a former prosecutor, that troubles me.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing that I very much held to as a prosecutor is, we're gonna do this fairly. We're gonna strike hard blows, but not foul ones. But this is one where I'm concerned that there's a real risk of striking foul blows.
Well, and ultimately, if anybody and everybody is a priority, then that means every single undocumented immigrant should be removed and will be put in removal proceedings. And, and we'll just tear apart families willy-nilly and send home otherwise completely law-abiding people who have been here for 50 years.
And I guess it's a bit of a echo chamber in here because we probably agree with that. But, I mean, there's a large portion of the population, and I suspect some of our listeners are going to say, yeah, damn right. I mean, really, damn right.
If we think about time,
yeah,
it's about time somebody holds them accountable for coming here illegally.
Right.
Yeah, I could hear somebody say that.
So I mean,
I acknowledge that. And trust me, I have these same family members that live in Gilbert that are your opposing voices here. But what I would say to them is many of these families are what they would call like mixed status. Okay? So where you have a parent who's undocumented, but the parent has 4 children that are citizens. They live here. They were born here. They're not going anywhere. And so is it really in this country's best interest to deport a mother and a father with 4 citizen children living here? We're going to send the parents back to their country of origin, Mexico, El Salvador, something. And what are we going to do with those 4 kids? We're going to put them in the foster care system when they have 2 perfectly functioning parents that are taking care of them just fine? Because that's what we're looking at. If everybody's a priority, it doesn't matter how long you've been here, whether you've committed crimes or not, you're just deemed a public safety risk of some sort, then you can be deported and your children are basically rendered orphans because they don't have to be deported. And P.S., they're not citizens of any other country. The children are not going anywhere. They belong in the United States.
See, now I really want to be like the xenophobia whisperer and just like say all the awful response, they should have thought about that when they came to the country illegally 50 years ago. They're the ones that have put this on their kids, right? By their own, because they're people that are just xenophobic at heart that are going to take any kind of explanation like that,
Oh, absolutely, and
it's frustrating.
Would you like to respond to that, or no?
Oh, please,
yeah.
Please.
Yeah.
What is the response to that?
Okay, well, my response would be, I would be very curious to see why did those parents come? When they came 20, 30 years ago, what is their story? I want to hear it, right? Just like I feel like everybody deserves a chance to be heard. I want to know what motivated you to leave your own family at home, to leave your language back home, to leave your country, come to a foreign place where you are a second-class citizen from the day you step foot on this soil. You are treated differently than everybody else. You get less due process. You get less respect in a grocery store. You're just a second-class citizen. But there must have been something motivating you, something very heartfelt that you felt it was worth the risk of crossing the border, which can be deadly, of course. But then also living a life as a second-class citizen, living in the shadows. It's traumatic living in the shadows, not being a full-fledged member of society.
So I love what you're saying, and I'm very interested in the stories. Do you have like a standard by which you judge which stories are acceptable and which ones aren't for coming in illegally? Like which ones are worthy and which ones aren't?
I'll be totally honest with you. Yeah. I'll be totally honest. Yeah. Sometimes I will hear a story and I'll be like, you know what, dude? I work for a nonprofit. We have very limited resources, right? Your story is not that compelling to me. That will happen sometimes. And I will not want to dedicate as many resources to that case as I will a more compelling case. Yes, there's a spectrum of motivating factors, right? But for me, usually it's not just, hey, I just wanted to make a couple more bucks an hour. I mean, it takes more than that to motivate somebody typically.
And for these very valid reasons of fleeing danger and coming into a country illegally, the U.S. Are there not channels to be able to do that legally? When they're So we'll just
sure. Yeah, there is a channel, and it's called the refugee process, right? And that's when you deal with everything from your country of origin. Mm-hmm. You apply to become a refugee, but you don't come to the United States. You're doing it all through, legal channels, and you're applying ahead of time. And you jump through all these hoops. Sometimes it takes, as we've learned this week, up to 2 years to go through that process to be formally approved as a refugee. Well, that requires a whole lot of time and a whole lot of resources. And if you are truly in an emergency situation, you don't have time to wait for a biometrics interview and face-to-face interview and paperwork to come back and that sort of thing. And the only reason we're not seeing, asylum seekers, folks coming through our borders from the Middle East, is because they can't physically make it here.
Yeah, right.
If they could physically make it here, they wouldn't be going through this crazy refugee application. They'd be asylum seekers. They would be at the border knocking on our door saying, let us in, which is what is happening with these folks from Central America. They are knocking down our door saying, let us in. We are afraid. And they have many, many cases that are just as compelling as the folks from Syria. Yeah. You see what they've been through. You see the death certificates of their, children who have been murdered by gang members and that sort of thing. Like, this is really a legitimate crisis in Central America.
So conservative Republicans, or I should say fiscally conservative Republicans, they should be all in on this. This isn't going to cost much money at all, I'm sure, right? The enforcement, adding 10,000 immigration officers and everything else. So
you're being facetious.
I am.
I can tell you're being facetious.
You could tell?
I could tell.
You're pretty good.
Yeah.
That's good. I was laying it on pretty thick.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing that just strikes me is this is when we talk about big government, I mean, this is big government.
This is big. This is big boys.
Huge.
Yeah.
Huge government.
Huge government.
Yeah. And these two executive orders were just sort of slipped in, not given a whole lot of attention. And then there's a third executive order that's getting all the attention that has to do with the Middle East. But I do feel like that third executive order is going to be short-lived. In fact, he articulates it's going to be like 90 days and it's going to be 120 days. And then that executive order will probably lose a lot of steam. But the other two executive orders that are still in place are going to stay with us.
Right. Those are bans. These are removals. These are, this is broadly worded stuff. I think that's, I was struck by when you told me, I said, hey, Mindy, come on, let's talk about the executive order. And I was figured, we'll just talk about the sexy one, right? We'll talk about the Middle East one. And mainly because I had a pretty good grasp of that one.
That's the one that you read.
That one I actually read, and I read all the statutes tied to it, summarized it. I was like, boom, I've got this thing locked down. And then she's like, yeah, that's kind of interesting, but you may want to look at these ones too. And
I guess the one part about the third executive order, the one having to do with the Middle East, that one does get sort of sexy because it does involve religion, where the first two executive orders don't touch on anything having to do with religious discrimination. But I do feel like there is a religiously motivated reason for the third one, and having to do with the Middle East. And so that clearly, people are up in arms. They're literally taking to the streets.
And on the third one, I'll just say, I think we got to be a little more careful with our language and what we're saying about it. I think there's been some overreaching by especially the left, and I'm not saying I'm not advocating for it. It's not what I would do, but it's really not as bad as what people are saying. It's not. it is temporary. It's going to, it's a moratorium. It is, and to the extent that impacts people and impacts real people, that's a big deal. And especially the biggest thing I think about the third one that's I think worth mentioning is the impact that it had on permanent residents, green card holders, and people who have been here, student visas, and these people. And I have a personal experience with the third one because my business partner's wife has a green card, or his fiance rather has a green card. She's from I'm going to get it wrong. I think she's from Iran, and they've got a wedding coming up in a couple months. 40% of their wedding is not going to be able to make it now, and so they're. I mean. Not to say, big effing deal, right? So some people don't get to go to a party. That's not what I'm saying. Is it impacts real people substantially, and in some cases, very tragically. So I'm not trying to minimize the real impact on real people. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we would be better served if we are accurate in what it is, and it's not a Muslim ban. It is a moratorium. It is 7 specific countries that are not arbitrarily picked, as Mindy mentioned. There was precedent for why those 7 countries. It existed under Obama. There were Obama, as Mindy likes to call him, and so there is a basis for this for those 7 countries, and I'm not saying there's a basis in the extreme vetting or whatever the hell that means. I don't know what the current vetting is exactly and how you could do more. Those are all questions that need to be answered. And I forgot where I went there other than...
well, you were trying to say, there's been a lot of sensationalized responses to these executive orders, and especially the third one, and that you're going through them looking very carefully, and it's actually not as egregious as it's being made out to be. Is that...
yeah, and I hate to say it because I know I'm going to get killed for saying it, and I've been accused as being
Are you ready to get killed?
You can be killed by other people who have also read every single thing in it, right?
But I'm going to just get raked over the coals for holding that opinion. I've been accused now of being a Trump apologist, and I think I'm pretty well on record of not being a Trump apologist over the course of the past couple years. Yeah. But
okay, can I just bring up one thing though?
Yeah.
I mean, I understand the point you're making. So Trump just wants to slow down these processes, wants some more careful vetting. I think he said it in his words, we got to slow this down until we figure out what the hell is happening. And, but if you do read it carefully, you do realize that there is some racial discrimination going on. He never mentions the word Muslim and he never mentions the word Christian, but he does say that, so there's going to be a cessation of all new refugee applications for the next 120 days.
And we should do something real quick, and I like the point where you're going, and I'm glad you're making it because it's an important one. But there are 2 very separate and distinct portions of that executive order. The one has to do with just entry and immigration benefits, including visas. And that really has to do with the 7 countries. And then there's the second piece that has to do with the U.S. refugee program. And when it comes to the refugee program, specifically, that's the piece where religion is mentioned.
That's true.
Okay.
That was my reading too.
Yeah, what you were going to where there, although it's not specifically mentioned, it certainly is very clear that there's some intent.
Yeah. So I appreciate the point you're making. So it does sort of bifurcate. There's the one part that has to do with just travelers from those 7 countries, and then there's the other part that has to do with refugees. And that is a cessation for all refugees across the world, right? Not just those 7 countries, is my understanding. But then Syria is singled out as saying, you know what, Syria, we aren't comfortable with stopping your refugee program for just 120 days. We are going to stop your program indefinitely. We don't know when we're going to pick it up again with you, Syria, because we do not trust you at all. And then specifically relating to Syria, saying that they will prioritize religious minority folks who have been persecuted, which, when you are singling out Muslim countries and then saying, but we will prioritize your religious minorities, that to me means somebody who's not Muslim gets prioritized.
Right.
So they are bringing up religion, and they're prioritizing folks who are of particular religions over others. And that is really just unprecedented in American law. We don't make distinctions based on legal benefits based on your religion.
And there was a call related to that to put priority for I think the language is the minority religion of these nations, so non-Muslim. So anytime you say that, you are treating religions different, and the problem in that executive order, as I saw it, was it calls for legislation to accomplish this. So there's a directive to the legislature to draft laws that will treat religions differently.
Oh, is there? I didn't catch that.
Yeah, so it specifically says because when it does say about dealing with religions differently or putting priority to the minority religion as it relates to the refugee program, it says to the extent permitted by law, this is what's to happen. That at least reflects some awareness that may be illegal and
may be constitutional.
Right. To the extent that the Constitution dictates. But then it says, and it's a call for legislation to accomplish that. So again, that's my problem, or that's one problem I have with that clause, is that in addition to treating religion differently, and I have First Amendment really does matter it's always mattered to me for a lot of different reasons, but and then a call to say, I'm trying to see what that looks like. Legislate an American law that says an American law is going to treat one religion differently, and not just differently, give priority to one religion over another. Mm-hmm. I can't think of many things that are as offensive as
the outrage. 90 days, 120 days, whatever. But when you start giving priority to certain religions over others, that's when the crap hits the fan.
Yeah. You look like you.
I know I've got a smart aleck comment about Dallin H. Oaks, but I don't think I'm gonna say it. He's all about religious freedom, right? So we're allies on this issue.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, because he wouldn't want Muslims to be looked at differently than Christians.
Yeah, and that's
or to have less rights. That all of the recent talks about the attacks on religion, I don't know if maybe they did foresee this one, and that's what they were warning us all about.
Well, didn't they used to call Joseph Smith the American Muhammad?
Yeah.
And,
yeah. I mean, I don't think that came from inside the church. He
probably
wore it with pride. He probably wore it with pride, but I think that was...
and in both of these EOs, I do see a Mormon tie into to both of these, but particularly the first one we're talking about related to people who are in the country illegally. And I've been a little surprised. Well, first of all, the church did come out some time ago, and you may remember better than I have. You've been more tied in than I have in many years, but where they did take a position on kind of immigration and specifically as it related to
refugees.
Well, and I'm talking about a couple years ago, not recently. Am I making that up? It seems like they took a statement and got some hit for it.
But you are wrong in the time frame because it was just last year. It was in April of 2016, and there was a big push for supporting refugees, and it came from a member of the Quorum of the 70 and also one of the leaders of the auxiliaries. I think she's in the presidency of the Relief Society. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But it was like
there was a talking conference about it too.
That's what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and there was a whole new website set up, and this whole program called "I Was a Stranger," and I very much because I was hoping that it would invigorate LDS folks for supporting a cause that I really care about, right? And I even tried to get my own ward members sort of on board, and some of the undocumented kids that I work with. And that was just last year. That was April, right? And it was a huge push. And so when I saw this coming out, and I thought, wow, the Mormon Church should definitely have something to say about how we're going to treat refugees.
And they did. They took a stand.
I haven't even seen it.
You haven't? We'll have it up.
I know. I know you know, but I haven't.
You haven't looked at it?
No.
Well, but before we get there, I did want to a lot of people, many people may not know that the church has they have basically knowingly helped illegal immigrants go on missions. They ensure that they stay in the country. Mm. So they know they very much benefit from immigration. The church does in members that come over and in baptisms and those things. Mm. But I know specifically a kid from our ward who they were concerned with, because he was like a kid who was brought over as a young infant or as a very young child. Grew up here. This is the only place he's ever known. Doesn't speak Spanish, and he wanted to go on a mission. And they specifically made sure that he would stay in country, so that there wouldn't be any consequences. So the church is pro-immigrant and they're pro-refugee, just as you said. And it's and I was certain that on this issue they would take a position and they would have the opportunity to issue a statement on a moral issue, which they've clearly have declared that they will do in the past when it comes to LGBT issues and marijuana. I mean, marijuana is a big deal to the church. They've taken very strong stances against marijuana. They have bravely taken on the moral ills of our day, including marijuana and people who love each other.
You're being facetious again.
Now I'm being dicky. Okay. Because it really does frustrate me that they. Welcome to our podcast, Mindy. This is where we get.
This is where it gets ugly.
Gets ugly, yeah. When they take this, they claim moral high ground. They say they are a beacon on a hill, and the positions that they choose to take on moral issues have to do with the children of gay parents and marijuana. But on this issue, this is what they said on the refugee issue on just a couple days ago. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is concerned about the temporal and spiritual welfare of all God's children across the earth, with special concern for those who are fleeing physical violence, war, and religion persecution. The Church urges all people and governments to cooperate fully in seeking the best solutions to meet human needs and relieve suffering. Period. Close quote.
That second sentence was pretty good, though.
That they encourage all people and governments to cooperate fully in seeking the best solutions to meet human needs and relieve suffering.
Well, I thought that's not a bad sentence, but the one before that about people that are leaving.
We do have special concerns for those who are fleeing physical violence, war, and religious persecution. Yeah. Right. What was so clever about this, and I mean that, it was very clever, is that I saw whatever the position was, whatever anybody's individual position was, they grabbed this statement and embraced it and said, see, the church supports my view of it.
So it's a one-size-fits-all statement.
Yep. Mm. They both said everything and nothing at the same time as it relates to this.
Well, because they're saying that they encourage the government to do what's best. Correct. And so as a listener, your subjective idea of what's best is reflected in that statement very well without any connection really being made.
Right. Mike Tannehill would love this statement. Okay? And Mike Tannehill, Mindy, is this guy who's a little nutty, but he's very... I'd call him. He is as Islamophobic as exists, and he would say, "Yes, that's exactly what we need to do. And the thing that is best to relieve suffering is to make sure they are taken care of in their country and they stay." Right. And so there's a lot of people that have taken that, and that's what's been frustrating, because I really think if they're, I feel very strongly that the church does support the refugee program and would take that position. I think they're caught in a bit of a catch-22 by wanting to be beholden to their both their base and those people who they're now politically bound to. I think it's challenging for them to take a strong or hardline position against this executive order or reducing or restricting refugees, which has happened. We've gone from 117,000 to a cap of 50,000 now, which is nothing for our country.
Right. And I think the feeling is that, we are one of the wealthiest countries in the world, and we're shirking our responsibilities.
Yeah. The other thing I hear, and I'm interested in, is that people point to France and they point to other countries where there are these ghettos that have risen up, and I think so. The one thing I think is fair is I don't want to go too one-sided to say that there aren't risks associated with some of these with bringing in people from these countries. I think there are. And I'm criticized by Glenn's wife, and I will debate a little bit because I tend to lean more towards Ham Saris.
That's funny.
Sam Harris when it comes to Islam and I'll just say Islam, and that it does tend to promote a more violent approach. I think that's a reality, and I think it's fair to acknowledge that and say that there are real risks and there are real issues going on in other countries and other European countries. I think we can look at it and say that exists. That's not a reason to say we shouldn't take these people for a number of reasons. One, I think our country is better equipped culturally to absorb another culture. I think it can be diffused a little better in our country as diverse as we are, better than other countries. The wealth that we have, just kind of the all those factors, I think make our country a better place to receive other people. And we just
better than who?
European countries who are smaller, who are less diverse. So bringing in a larger, very insular community, very very different. That's a real contrast, and I think that's where some of the conflict's happening. Whereas I think you could, like I said, they'd be diffused a little better into our country than others. But some of the other day it was somebody posted about somebody commenting about, well, why would we treat them differently than they would treat us? Their borders aren't open and they aren't taking them in. Why would we treat them differently? And my response was, I wanted to play the clip from 300 where he says, this is Sparta! This is Sparta! This is fucking America! That's why.
Why am I holding this?
This is an amazing parlor game. Think of the number of times you've seen the movie 300. Write it down.
This is bullshit.
Come on, I just need the number for the game. It's really fun.
Write down a number. Come on, write it down.
It's fine. I'm not looking. Okay, I lied. This is a test, actually, to see if you're gay. Because if you've seen the movie 300 more than once, you're gay. What does it say?
It's not important.
6.
You're gay.
Why?
You never saw 300.
You never saw 300?
No.
Really?
Sorry.
This is a good movie.
Okay.
300 was the number of Hippeus, the king's personal bodyguard.
Oh, so, the king was, really into hot dudes and stuff?
You don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
And the little Speedos they wore? Come on.
They actually fought bare naked? So Speedos are way less gay.
Come on. You know who's in it as, as I just watched it the other day, as,
Jared Butler?
well, he's in it, but the other dude that's in it is, Magneto.
Fassbender?
Yeah, Fassbender's in it.
Right.
Yeah, it's really long hair. Hey, he's sexy in that one too, man.
Yay!
Anyway, that's why we do it, because we're America, and that's why we can do it.
Yeah.
I want to play some Neil Diamond now.
Neil Diamond. Free. We want to be free.
I really hate that song.
We huddle.
Oh, I hate it.
Holding on to dream. Something like that.
Oh, man. Oh, it's depressing. All right.
Well, I think there is a silver lining, and that is that folks are starting to get interested in this topic. I'm starting to see some political activism from folks that have never seemed to be interested in politics before. And so I think that is actually a positive. And that's not just in relation to these executive orders. It's just in response to Trump in general.
Yeah.
We've got people calling their congresspeople for the very first time.
Right.
People marching for the very first time, actually exercising some of their democratic rights. And so that's sort of exciting.
Yeah. No, and I, have decided to stop reading news articles because it's just frustrating. And so one of the things I'm trying to do is just...
and that's because President Trump told you that the media is the bad guy, right?
That's right.
So you're like...
Fake news.
Yeah.
How do I know who to trust?
Right, yeah. So I just don't read them anymore.
No, but in fairness, even any time I've been involved in something personally that's been reported in the news, and it's happened, handful of times in my career where I've been involved in cases that are either get local or even in some cases national attention. And what I've learned is even some of the best of journalists get about 40% wrong on if they're doing a good job on cases that I really, really know the facts on. So that caused me to say, okay, well, let me make sure I understand this. And the more I've been going through the executive orders, and it's if anything, it's comforting because it just doesn't seem like anything is quite as sensational as what any of the headlines and the reports are, and the news summaries are. So one of the things I've done, and we'll see if it comes to anything, but to kind of try to get a group of online friends who come from different walks of life, different backgrounds, and to try to see if we just have an understanding about what the facts are, but then to get into some policy discussions. What I'm trying to do is reject identity politics, as I've been trying to preach against, for the last year, at least since the election, and see if that can happen, if that's even possible to get a group of people to just reject identity politics. And I think I hope what I'm seeing, and I'd be interested in both your takes, is that I'm starting to see a shift away from that as people do want to become more informed and make sure they're not just following their ideology to the same degree as what they're seeing what might be viewed as their political opponents. I hope that's happening. Maybe it's just pie in the sky on my part, but I don't know. Are you guys noticing that, or is it as bad as ever?
I think I personally am as bad as ever. And it might have to do with where I work, but also my connection with the LGBT community. There are just some things I'm actually just not really interested in giving a sincere listen to what the other side has to say. That's a terrible thing to admit, but since I just see the human side of certain issues every single day, I just have a really hard time entertaining opposing viewpoints.
Well, and maybe I didn't articulate that well, because I do not listen to the other side. That's not the point. I think the point is, for me, is coming to conclusions on your own and coming to the right conclusion.
Yeah, see, but now I'm confused by what you said earlier, because you were talking about rejecting identity politics. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how you can even recognize who is on the other side if you don't have an identity that you're responding from.
Well, my identity, when I say reject identity politics, I mean reject both sides' identity. That's really what it comes down to.
So there wouldn't be an other.
No, there's what I'm seeing is extremes are wrong. Extremes are. I'm not going to say they're bad. I'm saying they're wrong. Okay. An example is when somebody calls it a Muslim ban, that's wrong. That's fundamentally wrong.
I may be misunderstanding what you mean when you talk about political identity then.
Yeah, it's so
you would still consider yourself a liberal, or you would reject that label and you'd say, no, I'm going to take each issue on its merit.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying it should be issue based.
Right. So in that case, then there is no other side.
Well, but every issue has basically two sides. So the example I gave the other day was, I really like your painting. Just noticed that. It's pretty. An example, I was drawing an analogy between, we were talking about risk. Okay. We were talking about the risks of bringing refugees in, and at what point is the risk too great, right? And so I was making the analogy of gun control. Is that the same arguments that you apply to regulation of guns are the arguments that are being applied to regulation or restriction of refugee entry. And the difference is almost to 100%. If you are pro gun regulation, gun restriction, you are going to be for refugee entry, and vice versa. So the same arguments that they make, that somebody makes on an issue of gun control, they're going to take the opposite position on refugee. That is identity politics, to be able to say, I can predict with almost 100% certainty what your position is going to be on this refugee entry based on what your position will be on gun control. That is asinine. That is insane that someone can predict something on that issue and predict which way you likely voted in this election. When gun control or gun restrictions, gun laws, all those things, that I don't see that as a political issue. I don't see this refugee issue as a political party issue, but it's become that. That's what I mean by identity politics. So people ask me what I am politically. Well, I can tell you what my voting card is. I can tell you who I voted for in this race versus this race versus this race, but you can't look at my ballot and you can't see you couldn't predict what my position would be on any particular issue based on my position on another issue. And that's why I get torn by a lot of people, because they assume I'm an ally, meaning if I take a position on this, I must be an ally to them on every other particular issue. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that I'm not. Now but the other part of that is I'm open to being wrong on my position. I'm not just bound to a position because it's tied to my identity. I don't identify myself as a Second Amendment guy. I don't identify myself as, whatever, law enforcement guy, or, I can be pro law enforcement, which I am. I mean, very pro law enforcement. And I work with law enforcement and train and continue to teach and train law enforcement. Some of my best friends are law enforcement, Glenn, mm-hmm. But yet I battle them all the time in my job and philosophically, law enforcement overreach. So when it comes to, for example, Black Lives Matter versus Blue Lives Matter, I don't know what to do with that, because I very much, I contribute to the 100 Club, which is the Fallen Officer Club. I have a Fallen Officer plate on my, I know people who have died in the line of duty. I know these people personally, and I can look at overreach by law enforcement and say that can't happen either, and that law enforcement do horrible things as well, and abuse their power. I don't understand the either or, and that's what's frustrating today. And that's what really depresses me.
So is that what, when you asked the question earlier, Mindy answered, I didn't, because I just started needling you, but you asked, are we seeing a trend towards less identity politics and more of this kind of issue approach that you're talking about? Is that what you were?
Yeah.
So you're responding from the frustration that you just got out. That's what you're.
Yeah. I mean, are we seeing that anymore? I guess maybe.
I guess I'm not.
You're not.
So I think Mindy said she's not seeing that differently, but you are.
And maybe I am, because I'm forcing myself to do it, and I am not paying attention to it as much, and so the only people that I'm interacting with online as much are more people who are willing to at least be open to that. So anyway, that was a lot of words, but that's not to say that all sides or the other side is equal. And when you talk about the LGBT issue, Mindy, you know my position on that. I'm pretty clear on this podcast over the past 5 years my position on that. I will give no quarter to somebody who's going to try to restrict those rights. That is, that's just a fundamental, that's a principle for me. But at the same time, before I will criticize a law based on an article or a headline, I want to make sure I understand what that law is, and the law is actually restricting and doing the damage that somebody says it is. I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a fair approach, and probably an ideal approach if you're able to do it. But what you're describing actually takes a lot of work. Finding the statutes, reading the executive orders, just crawling through that mud is a lot of hard work. And reading an easy to digest article on CNN takes 2 minutes. Right. And so it's just harder work.
No, it is. And what I've learned is just that. I live in statutes, and it's not fun. But federal statutes are another animal. Like you think some of these state statutes that I deal in, that's complicated enough. Some of these federal laws are just pages and pages and pages and pages to try to get through, especially the immigration stuff. I mean, hats off to you, Mindy, for doing this stuff, because that's just above my head. And getting this group of very, very smart people together to try to understand these was a little daunting to see how long it took us to really say, okay, we think this is what this means. So maybe what we can do, maybe what I'm hopefully willing to be able to do a little bit is with these people, with this group of people, is to maybe distill this information to other people so that they don't have to do the work and the hard work themselves. But
they still have to do some work, but you make the work easier. Right. Like the Cliff Notes version of...
Well, I'll tell you, I just recently summarized the refugee, the Muslim ban, EO, and I put it into 2 pages with almost all bullet points. So it can be distilled into that way. Now, that's the starting point. Okay, this is what it says. That's not an answer to anything.
Then you got to create like a South Park cartoon to, have the candies and whatnot. You got to make it entertaining. You got to daily show it.
Schoolhouse Rock.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Something. Well, that's where Glenn comes in. Glenn will figure out how to present it in an entertaining fashion. Did we cover what you wanted to? What you think was important on the executive orders, Mindy, especially the ones that impact immigrants that are currently here, as well as border entry? Because one of the things you said is it affects people that are here, but it also affects people that are crossing over.
Right.
Did we cover that piece?
Okay, there's one more piece. I don't want to totally nerd out on you, but we did miss one important piece, okay? And that is, so under the Obama administration, we had something
does
called...
say that like she got shit in her mouth.
Now, I'm doing it on purpose. So we have something called expedited removal. Okay, and it's shrouded in a bunch of statutes in what you read, and so it doesn't jump out at you. Mm-hmm. You have to actually read the statutes to even know what it's referring to. But it comes back to the due process question, and this is due process for folks that are actually just have recently crossed. Okay. So under the Obama administration, you could get expeditiously removed. Mm-hmm. Judge.
Wait, say that again. You froze for a second. You expeditiously removed what?
Yeah, you never see a judge. Okay? Under that particular kind of removal or deportation. Can you hear me? It seems like it's cutting out or something.
No, we're good.
Okay. Anyway, so in the past, to be expeditiously removed like that, Border Patrol had to find you within 100 miles of the border. Mm-hmm. So the assumption is you didn't get very far. You just barely entered, right? And also, you had to prove that you'd been here longer than 2 weeks. And if you couldn't prove that, then you were a candidate for expedited removal. which basically just meant you'd have a really short interview trying to see if you had any legitimate fear of return. And if they didn't believe you or you said no, you get deported just like that. Okay? There's no hearing. There's no judge. Of course, there's no jury. There's never a jury in an immigration court.
But is that the waiver process where they're waiving and saying, yeah, I just deport me, just send me? Is that similar or is that different?
No, I believe that's a stipulated removal.
Okay.
This is expedited removal.
Gotcha.
So you don't necessarily agree with it. You just don't get a hearing. Okay, so, but at least in the past, under Obama's rules, there were some seriously strong indications that you truly had just barely arrived. So you were found within 100 miles of the border, and you hadn't been here longer than 2 weeks. Really, you had just gotten here. So let's remove you because you don't have any serious ties to this community. Mm-hmm. Well, under this executive order, the one that has to do with border issues, they expand expedited removal. So they're expanding a deportation process that does not involve a judge. Mm-hmm. Okay? And so now they can find you anywhere in the interior of the United States. You can be thousands of miles away from the border and still expeditiously removed. And instead of it being 2 weeks or less, it can be 2 years or less. So you potentially could be in the middle of Kansas, have lived here for 2 years or just under 2 years. ICE grabs you and deports you without a hearing, without ever seeing a judge. Which, I mean, when you understand the human toll that a deportation can take on a family, it's pretty devastating to never be allowed to air your side of the story, to bring about a case, to at least present your side of the story to a judge. So that's a serious concern. Because it's a complete lack of due process. I mean, they'll give you a little mini interview trying to figure out whether you have legitimate fear, and it's called a credible fear interview. They're trying to figure out if you have fear, and B, if you're credible. But the standards that they use for figuring out whether you're credible or not, I am not even aware of what those standards are.
Right.
You know, it's up to the officer, low-level officer, determining whether you're believable or not. So,
now, what's that phrase again? Expedited
removal. Yeah, which means deportation.
And you know, the way that you said it at the beginning, it sounded like it's such an obscure phrase. Like there's definition around it, but you have to read through all of these statutes in order to know what they're talking about. So this was put in there quite intentionally and kind of hidden.
You know, I think it was, because the very first time I read through it, I didn't pick up on it at all. I mean, one of my colleagues who said, "What did you think about the expedited removal portion?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And so it wasn't until I went back and he pointed out, because it's just, instead of actually using that term, expedited removal, it just lists a ton of statutes by the numbers.
Just
right?
a string site, yeah.
Exactly. So you'd have to read through all these statutes to even understand that it's getting at expedited removal.
But expedited removal is a term of art.
It's redefining expedited removal.
Expanding.
It's expanding. Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, and that was intentionally done. I mean, so one of my earlier questions about what an executive order is, this is a way of, I mean, it's almost, I mean, would this be a stretch of an executive? What did you say before? It was like how to implement?
Yeah, an application. Policy.
And policy. But
so what they're going to say is, well, this is no different than what Obama did. That's the typical response, right? And you know, Mindy, I did want to address that. Is what I hear is, you know, Obama has deported more people than, you know, he was regarded as not a friend to the immigrant, and especially that he was very much. He very much removed people and was deporting and. As much as anyone. Is that fair or is that not fair?
No, that's true. He has deported more people than any other U.S. president before him.
And why is that? Is there a I guess some reasoning as to why that would be?
Guilty conscience for forging a birth certificate, probably.
No.
I think that there's a lot of pressure put on him. I think that people truly do feel like our immigration system is broken, that we don't have control over our borders. Lots of people, whether it's legitimate or not, feel like immigrants have overrun certain parts of their community. And so I think there was a lot of pressure for Obama to do something about it. And you can see him trying to carve out areas where undocumented immigrants can get relief, like what I mentioned before with the Dreamers. That was his baby. He brought that through, and it created a lot of relief for a lot of deserving people. But I think there was always this nagging, like, you've got to do something to fix immigration. And I think that, lots of lawmakers actually tried to address, statutes and try to revamp the structure. But there was so much gridlock that they just weren't able to do that. And perhaps the default was just deport more people.
The other thing I heard from at least some Border Patrol agent friends of mine is that's a bit of a it's a little misleading in that his deportations were dropping people who were scheduled to be deported off the bus station, and then they really weren't being deported. Whether or not that's really gone on, there's been some. I guess I'd say I have it on pretty good authority that's happening. If the people who told me that's happening, I rely on what they're saying. So that
it's inflated.
Yeah, so it might be actually more. The numbers might not be. These are people who do these turnarounds and they're actually not leaving the country, or they're just kind of dropped off. Just on in was it Aaronville, or what's on the other side there of when we go to Rocky Point, Glen? Anyway, that town right there, and then that's it.
Yeah, that could be it. People that are just sort of turned back around. I don't know what they actually counted as a deportation and what they didn't count. I'm not aware. But yeah, he has that title, like deporter in chief. He was called a time or two.
Well, ultimately, you've done a good job of reminding me that this is a human rights issue, and this is. These are real people, kids, people.
And they're coming from very dangerous places. I read a statistic recently that said that the number of Central Americans coming undocumented has surpassed the number of Mexicans. So if you are Central American and you are willing to travel through Mexico, potentially travel through the desert, leave everything, there's usually something more than just money that's motivating you. It's usually more than poverty.
And that I can just corroborate that, because in that short period of time that I was doing that job, not the ICE job, but when I was kind of involved with the 287G program, is when they picked up a group that they identified as undocumented. A good portion of them were not from Mexico. They had gone through Mexico, but had started in one of those Central American countries. So that's finally educated me on why that is.
Yeah, and just a little something that will keep you up at night is that many of these folks, to get through Mexico, they don't actually have the funds to take a bus or be escorted through Mexico. And maybe you heard these stories, but they're real. There's a train that winds its way through Mexico from the south up to the north, and it's called La Bestia, the Beast. And it is not a passenger train. It is a cargo train. So you can't actually get inside the train and be seated. So there are hundreds and hundreds of people that get on top of the train and cling to the top of the train for dear life for hundreds and hundreds of miles as they wind their way through Mexico. There have been documentaries on it. If you ever look up the word La Bestia train, it comes up. You can see pictures all over the place of, children, old people, families clinging to the top of this train. They don't have food half the time. They don't have water. They have to jump off, sleep in like a bush, hop back on the next morning. When I see human beings willing to do something that dangerous, People lose limbs, people die, they fall in between the cars of the train. And it happens all the time. I meet children all the time. I ask them, it's one of our standard questions, how did you get here? How did you get through Mexico? Because most of them are from Central America. And many of them say, La Bestia. These tiny little kids that climbed up on a train and just clung on for dear life.
Wow. El Tren de la Muerta.
Yeah.
I'm seeing
Train
it
of
well.
death. Train of death.
And that was it's so interesting to listen to you now because I'm just going back in time, like I said, however long ago, it was 8-10 years, and having one situation where a kid was a 14-year-old kid, and I was we were talking to them and trying to figure out how they got here and working on that was both a person and drug smuggling. So that'll happen a lot jointly, as you'll have kind of a combo. There's people are smuggling people as well as drugs, and we were trying to figure out maybe who the different players were. And there was this one 14-year-old kid. We're like, okay, well, who are you here with? And just kind of, what do you mean? Who am I here with? You got a cousin, you got one of these other traveling companions is family or friends, and they're like, no. And then one of them says, well, no, but we're just we're taking care of him. Obviously, we're watching this kid, but. Wow, we don't know who this kid is, and I was just blown away by it.
Matt, this is the story of our clients. There's upwards of 1,400 unaccompanied children in Phoenix right now. They did not come with parents. They did not cross the border with parents. Okay, this is like a crisis, and they were in the news like 2 years ago, all over the place, like 2014. This huge surge of unaccompanied children. DHS didn't know where to put them, so they were putting them in army bases. Like they were sleeping on floors with like little metal blankets. It was a terrible crisis. But it's not so much in the media anymore. But the crisis is still here.
So if you have the power of executive order, what would you do?
What I do love this program DACA that Obama set up, where he acknowledges, there's so many people, they're good people, they're not criminals, and we can prove that they're not criminals. We can do a background check and see if they've ever committed a crime, and we want to give them some kind of at least temporary relief, give them a work permit so they can go and work legally and pay taxes, help them get a license so that they're not driving around without insurance, without a license, and getting into accidents and causing all sorts of problems. It doesn't mean that you have to become a citizen overnight. It doesn't even mean that you have to get a green card. It just means that temporarily if you're a good person and you have not been, violent with people, then we will give you some kind of temporary relief with the trust that you're going to continue to live an upright life, And I feel like that is a totally legitimate way to approach people who are here anyway, who have no intention of leaving. And just it encourages them to continue to contribute. So some version of DACA, which actually Obama tried to do with a parent program, is called DAPA, D-A-P-A, P relating to the parents, so right. Parents, citizens. But that was an executive order that failed. He executed it. Everybody was up in arms because it was going to grant relief to literally millions of undocumented parents. It went to the courts and actually went up through the courts and went to the Supreme Court, and ultimately the whole thing fell apart. It was struck down. So that's an example of an executive order that fell flat on its face. Yeah. So it is possible that any of these executive orders, if they're presented with a good challenge in court, it could be completely slapped down.
Well, these due process claims, I mean, that to me is a strong one. I mean, just as you said, we hear people all the time, U.S. citizens don't, or non-U.S. citizens don't get the benefit of the Constitution. They do.
They do.
They do. And that's just flat out, if they're here, I get a different question of if they're, if they're not here yet, but somebody's in the interior, they get the benefit of our laws. And of course they do. And who would suggest otherwise? How could we? And it's the lack of...
Well, that brings me to my question, because you asked her what she would do if she was president, right? I want to know what you would do if you were Jesus and you had a prophet here on the earth and a church and a structure. Like, what should the Mormon Church do? Or what should the response be? Because we talked about the response of the church earlier. Mm-hmm. What should it be?
You guys don't ask easy questions. I'll tell you what I feel is a Christian response to undocumented people.
Yeah.
And I feel like you have to be able to just view them as fellow human beings. And it's not that hard to do if you actually communicate with them. It's easy to turn them into the villain when you don't talk to them, when you consider them as the other, when you consider them as, when you criminalize them. But when you recognize that, there's actually an undocumented family that might live, say, down your street. Their kids are on the same bus as your kids when they go to school. They shop at the same place as you do, and they have exactly the same hopes and desires and needs as you do. They may have started out speaking a different language than you, but really often that's where the difference ends. So I do, and, I do feel like offering them refuge, offering them support, offering them understanding, offering them certainly due process at least, if they're getting into some trouble, is the Christian thing to do.
Yeah.
You ask my opinion, that's what it is.
I remember this story about a Samaritan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, I agree. That's how I feel too.
Was it yesterday or the day before? I went on YouTube and found a couple clips of Poor Wayfaring Man of Grief.
Ye poor wayfaring man of grief hath often passed me on my way, who sued so humbly for relief that I could never answer nay. I had not power to ask his name, whereto he went or whence he came. Yet there was something in his eye that won my love, I know not why.
I haven't listened or heard that song in a long, long time, and it really struck me. My Christian, upbringing and that kind of core that
serving others less fortunate than you.
Yeah, that really seemed to resonate with me. But that that song, that Poor Wayfaring Man of Grief, and it just had such it had more meaning now, without having a belief in a Savior or a God or anything. Is how we, and I'll give Holland credit. His talk about how we are the angels to other people. Mm-hmm. I found that inspiring. Yeah, that is, and in many ways that's been my atheist awakening. Is we have to be gods to other people. We have to be gods to ourselves. We have to provide the salve to other people. Prayer's not going to do it. Jesus isn't going to do it. People are the ones who have to provide that relief to other people. Mm-hmm. And this castigating globalism and this uprising of nationalism. It's something that doesn't. If it ever resonated with me as a kid, and maybe it did, it certainly seems immoral now.
Yeah,
I don't know. There's a statue somewhere. It says something about, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless tempest tossed to me.
That's a good memory, Matt.
I lift my lamp beside the golden door. I'm reading it. I know this.
Oh, stop!
See you.
I was going to let you maintain the illusion
was waving at your...
my daughter.
But I just how easily we parse through that and how easily it's been rejected by so many people. I don't understand. Come back to my good friend
Ham Saris.
Yeah, Ham Saris. It was actually my priest quorum advisor. The only thing he used to say over and over again was, "Be nice."
Yeah,
just be nice.
Yeah.
I don't know. Well, thanks, Mindy. Would you be willing to come on again? You're
Thanks
great.
so much. I hope I didn't come across as like this immigrant preacher, but I was allowed to express some very heartfelt feelings. I appreciate this avenue.
Oh, that's great.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks,
and I'll tell you, I did not know Mindy very well in high school. We didn't really run in quite the same circles, but she and Kristen knew each other a lot better, and I've not heard Kristen speak as highly as many people as she does Mindy, and given my opinion of Kristen, as you know, that's high praise. So
cool.
Well, thank you.
Oh, I did want to
Matt, correct me if I'm wrong. Were you on the football team in high school or no?
I was on the football team. Yes.
I think we jointly cheered for you, Kristen and I, because we were together. So we might not have run in the same circles, but I probably did raise a pom-pom on your behalf.
That's right. Oh, I did want to ask you though: if people want to get involved, anything that can be done, volunteer or anything your group is looking for that you want to put out there?
Yeah, if you don't mind. So our formal name is the Florence Immigrant and Refugee Rights Project. It goes by FIRRP. So if you go on www.firrp.org. There are ways to get involved. Of course, donations. We fear that potentially the children's program could get the axe, which would be devastating for all these children. But we have hope, and we actually do place hope in folks that care about our cause and are willing to donate. So yeah.
Great. Well. Sure appreciate you. Sure appreciate you.
Thank you. You actually caused me to dig in really deep to these orders that came out, and so not only did it make for some entertaining stuff tonight, but I'm sure I'm going to be using all this information.
Awesome.
For better or for worse as things move forward.
Well, I hope you'll let us call on you as a resource in the future, because I don't think we're going to be done talking about some of this stuff as things start actually being implemented and figured out. As I said, this isn't the end. This is the beginning.
Right.
And so a lot of things figuring out what's going to be going on. So.
Right. That's right, Matt.
Cool.
Well, thanks, you guys.
Yeah, thanks so much. It was fun.
All right.
Tell Donna today.
I will. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hi, this is Brian Johnson from Charlotte, North Carolina, and I am the third Nephite. You can comment on this episode or on the website on infantsonthrones.com. And if you really like what you hear, give the Quorum a 5-star rating and write a short review on iTunes. I did. Anyone for the closing prayer?
Thank you for listening to Infants on Thrones.